Hello and welcome to another episode of the Salmon's Pizzeria podcast, bringing you your weekly slice of Scottish football action. I'm your host today, Ethan Hampton, and today I'm joined with Josh Heggie and the pizzeria's very own Stu. How are we doing today, guys?
Yeah, wow. Yeah, not too bad now. It's been a long ride for the season, but it's on the up now, so we're bound to ruin it in January, I think.
Then, Josh, how about yourself?
Yeah, all good, mate. All good. It's it's been a great season so far, and good to another good weekend.
Yeah, I'm a bit annoyed that I couldn't come on before the Christmas time because I had a few things to say. Yeah, I promise, not making it up, that I actually was predicted we were going to go on a bit of a run ourselves at Dundee, that this was going to be a bit more of a season-defining run for us. But it just makes me kind of look a bit like a bell in the fact I'm saying it now, once we'll do the 3-winning game run. But more on that later. But we'll start off with the weekend's action, guys. We'll start off with probably the biggest game of the lot. All jokes aside, the Old Firm derby, because there's so much to cover across Scottish football in the past week. There's been ripples everywhere you look. Managers are getting sacked. It's kind of hard to keep track on everything. Not only just getting sacked, some of them are bringing back from the retirement home to manage teams again. It's crazy. So we start off with Rangers defeating Celtic at Parkhead. They obviously came back from behind, and interestingly, Chirimiti is the hero. Now, for me, there's something of a shades of Alfredo Morelos here, a very slow burner, but he's captured two massive moments, similarly to the Colombian striker I just named earlier, and could we very well be on for the same story. Start off with you, Stu. Chirimiti, Derby Day hero.
Yeah, to be honest, it's a weird one with Chirimiti because it's always the price tag, and it always will be. I've always said I don't think you can spend that money in Scotland because even if they hit every KPI given to them, what's the maximum you're getting? Even as Rangers Celtic, you're looking 20-25 million max as a sale. And even then, it's probably not going to be that high. That's if they perform well over what you're expecting. So every time one of us spends big, I'm a bit worried because it's just too much pressure. I never think you're going to get the value for money. And certainly in the cauldrons of sort of Ibrox, Celtic Park, and that when you're spending 8 million, it's hard to forget that Chirimiti is 21 years old and he's still a kid. He's still like learning his trade almost. 8 million is a huge price to pay for that because the fans are thinking this should be a 20-30 goal striker instantly. Like he has to hit the ground running. There's no in between. So it was a tough one because it was obviously Thelwell's now sacked and he's the man who brought him in, and he brought him to Everton as well, where it didn't really work out. That said, despite the slow start, this has been coming, I think. I think in the past few weeks, he's been a much better player. He's playing with a lot more confidence. When he joined, he looked like he was sort of towing a truck on the back of him when he was running. We were told he was fast. I didn't see that at all. He looked slow. He couldn't really get himself around the pitch. And so I don't know if it was just a fitness thing or what, but now he's just flipped it completely. He looks quick. He's sharp. He can get over the pitch. He's mobile. But his hold-up play and his little sort of bringing guys in and things like that is night and day from sort of Miovski. And I like Miovski. He's a great penalty box striker. I don't think we create enough chances to really utilise his strength. So Chirimiti is, for me, the starting striker. And what you get from him is he can take a ball in, he can hold a man off, he can go in behind. But more importantly, those sort of little one touches that we don't have enough players actually that can do it with him, if I'm honest. But those one touches where you drill a ball in and someone has just peeled off and he can just sort of slide it out, whether it's a back heel or a little flick, they usually come off. They weren't at the start, but now they're coming off a lot more. And so I think the last few weeks we've seen slowly, it's not like he's been great. I think he was probably close to being man of the match in one of the previous games. So he's definitely on the up, I would say. The Old Firm wasn't a game I was expecting him to do what he did, but he was certainly the right choice to start because I think he just gave us something different. And I wanted us to start with pace and power because I think that's how you beat Nancy's Celtic anyway, because of the gaps they leave at the back. You need to be able to utilise that space. And so I think he was the right choice. But I'm really happy for him, if I'm honest, because it's almost like that. You do that thing of getting angry at him, and then it starts turning into sort of like apathy, and you want this guy to do well now because it's like he's got so much pressure on him. And he is a young lad. He's 21 years old, as I said, and it's so much pressure. So I'm delighted that he's managed to do it on the biggest stage of all. And if this doesn't give him confidence to kick on from here, then nothing will. Like, it's not going to work if he can't take it from here. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, delighted for him. And the first goal, I think we'll obviously discuss it. The first goal was much better. I think you said it in the preview bit before we come on, that this first goal should get a lot more credit than it does. But yeah, he's just, as I say, hopefully from here on, it's all good stuff with Chimiti. There will be dips given his age, but delighted for him. Really, really delighted for him.
Yeah, that first one's a very awkward finish. I mean, he's read the pace of the ball really well. He's had to take it the outside of the boot, and it's directly in the roof of the net. You don't see that kind of finish very often. To take it first time as well. I don't think the cameras have done a very good job of catching it to really kind of show off exactly what he applied himself on the ball there. And I also said in that preview bit, it reminded me of a goal scored in the FA Cup final, I think 2015. Olivier Giroud against Aston Villa. The game was already dead by that point, but again, it's the exact same kind of goal. Josh, we'll move on to you as well for a sec. Any notes from the Old Firm derby that maybe we've not picked up on, or do you want to go maybe into the more kind of general sort of consequence of the Old Firm? Of course, now it looks like that Danny Röhl has propelled Rangers back into a title race, and of course, the fate for Nancy in the dugout as well. Well, it's like the Abe Simpson thing from when he walks in the venue, does the whistling, puts the hat on the hat rack, collects the hat from the rack, heads back out again.
Yes, Ethan, it's been the same old story for Celtic under Nancy, where they start off the game really, really high intensity, pressure, and Rangers. Rangers looked a little bit lost that opening half an hour, 40 minutes. They were lucky to go in half time, really only one goal behind. It could have been two, potentially three, and at that point you start to think, oh, Rangers under the cosh here. But when your starting defence is three centre backs and that includes Ralston and Tierney, you are exposing so much space. And it's been a key theme for Celtic under Nancy that first halves they go out, they almost use all their ideas in the first half, and managers can adapt. And one thing we've seen from Danny Röhl and his spell at Rangers is his ability to, assess games and change whether he's going the back five or the back four. He can assess the situation, and more or less he's made the right decisions. And I think he's confidence to make subtle changes in the second half. Obviously, bringing on like Diamonde and things. Diamonde played really well, and he's a good player, Diamonde, and I think he's a real player that can have an impact on the rest of the season. And also, just a touch on Chermiti, having that slow start. You've got to remember he came into a Russell Martin side that was chaotic everywhere on the pitch. I think he maybe bore the brunt of it because of his price tag, in a similar way that Engels for Celtic, when he came in for that big money move and maybe didn't hit the standards. He was playing okay football. He was a good signing if he was a £2 million signing, but because there's a 10 plus million price tag on him, you expect him to, be scoring free kicks, corners, whatever, hat tricks every game. And when you're not getting that kind of expectation from a big money signing, your standards drop. Your standards increase. Sorry. So I feel a bit sorry for Chermiti that for his start, because as Stu said, his hold up plays always been encouraging. He's always done some of the basics rather well and just been let down by finishing on occasions. But he took his goal well, and even for the second goal, it wasn't the best of finishes, and you can question the goalkeeper's ability. I think he probably should have saved the second and the third. But the fact that he's done so well to get himself into the position to shoot shows a striker growing in confidence.
Yeah, I mean, it's his place to lose now as well, isn't it? I mean, he's the hero of the moment. He'll, goes without saying, presumably will start the following game and everything too. I think he must have started against Aberdeen at the time of recording. Am I right in saying that? I didn't
He did,
really
yeah.
catch the game. Yeah. And that says quite a lot as well, considering they've got someone like Bojan Miovski in the squad too, who of course hasn't really set the head of the light since arriving to Aberdeen, but we know exactly that he's proven in the Premiership, can explode with goals if provided with the service. So it's maybe just a case that, once Rangers get fully clicking, because Danny Röhl still yet to get his own players in the door come January and really assemble his own team. At the moment, it's like he's, as you said, it was a turbulent start with Russell Martin. He's getting the best out of Russell Martin's lot effectively. And And this was a manager that came with maybe not the highest level of pedigree on his resume, but I certainly seem to recall Josh Windass, of all people, former Rangers forward, spoke very highly of him on other outlets, way before he was even linked with the Rangers job. And the main thing that seemed to come across was his level of coaching and that key word you mentioned earlier, that adaptability. So if he's getting the best out of this lot as it stands, you can only then feel that with a very strong January window, that Rangers will be arguably the favourites from that point on, because obviously Hearts are still this sort of underdog side, despite being top of the league. It's a fairy tale season on their part. Whether they can maintain that, it's still going to be a massive question. Rangers and Celtic are always going to be the favourites, but if Celtic are going to struggle to kind of restore that stability, I mean, they've obviously appointed Martin O'Neill on to the end of the season. I mean, it worked as a short burst in between Rodgers and Nancy, but it's a much bigger commitment when you're going for the full, or sorry, not the full, but the remainder of the campaign. I mean, we're talking about a guy who almost fell asleep in one of his press conferences whilst managing for about a month.
Yeah, he's it's difficult to say in terms of the favourite tag, because I think Röhl is getting the absolute maximum out of some of these players, especially. But watching the 90 minutes every single week, there's still fallacies. There's still a lot of issues with this squad. We're still giving up a lot of chances. Even that Aberdeen game, we pretty much dominated that game. One of the most complete performances we've had since Röhl come in, and Aberdeen probably could have still had 2 goals out of that game. Mm-hmm. That's sort of the Rangers team we've got at the moment. It is going to depend on who he can get in, but I still think, one of the big points, and we've supposedly had 2 bids accepted today for a left back and a central midfielder, both 21, 22. I feel like we need a bit of experience. We need that mental edge, because I feel like a lot of these players, it seems to spread at Rangers. Anyone we get in seems to get this sort of mental, I don't want to say mental deficiency, but do you know what I mean? They crumble under pressure is what I mean. And although they didn't do it at Celtic, yeah, exactly, yeah. Right. They didn't crumble at Celtic Park, which I thought they would. I was saying, I watched it with my old man, and I was saying, if we get in at 1-0, we'll have a chance, because the second half under Nancy is I say historically, but in the previous 7 games is not great. So I was confident if we could get in 1-0 down, but like Josh said, we got battered in that first half. We had the one big chance of Gassama, but apart from that, it was waves of Celtic attacks, and credit the defence, because they're standing up big. Butland's keeping us in big moments, and it is helping that we've our centre back is 9 foot tall, so he's chipping in with a lot of goals at the moment from set pieces, and that's huge, because we've seen in the English Premiership how big. I think set piece goals have gone up 25% this season or something. People will say Arsenal score all of them, but it is more widespread, isn't it? Every team pretty much is scoring more set pieces, so it's becoming more and more important in this sort of modern game. Certainly this season. Yeah, I think it is going to depend. It's going to depend on everyone's January, because Hearts have already been busy. They've been signing players. Celtic are apparently Celtic are going back for Kyogo. We're hearing that whether that one comes off again is going to be interesting to see. They're sort of following the pipeline of Rangers from a few years ago, where if in doubt, just sign all your ex-players and hope that fixes it, which it doesn't. So we'll have to see how that goes. But yeah, for Danny Röhl, and as you mentioned earlier, Ethan, with how highly he's spoken of in the game. I mean, he was at Sheffield Wednesday, which, it's a big jump from a relegation sort of threatened Championship team, albeit arms tied behind your back with the financial issues, to one of the old firm. It's such a huge leap. But from his body, I always judge players and managers, not judge them, but take a big sort of, hint of what they're going to be like from how the fans of the teams they've been at react. And if you get fans saying he's rubbish, like we look at Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, when Gio was getting the job, on paper it looked an amazing appointment. And Feyenoord fans, the ones that he achieved success under, were saying it's not an amazing appointment. He plays this sort of U-bend style football. It works for a little bit, and then it gets found out, and he can't. It's boring to watch. And we were like, he's won you a title, and then we watched it, and eventually it became that. So it's not right every time, but I think a lot of fans, the ones watching it every week, they know what a player and what a manager is like. So the Sheffield Wednesday fans speaking so highly of Danny Röhl and saying, he will go on to be a big manager, managing big clubs, and you're lucky to have him. And obviously, a lot of the Rangers fans would not agree with that. I still think we are not playing great, but we are getting the most, the absolute maximum. And you said about Josh Windass going on about him. I drove up the road a couple of weeks back, and it was like a 7-hour drive, and I was randomly just put the Under the Kosh podcast on just to listen to a few interviews, and I can't even remember who it was now, but basically he was at Southampton, this guy, and he didn't get on with Ralph Hasenhüttl, who was the manager at the time, the German manager, and they said, "Oh, I thought he was really good. Everyone hears good stories about him and what he did for Southampton," and this guy went, "No," he said. There was another bloke at Southampton. His coach did everything. A guy by Danny Röhl, and if he could have spoke better English at the time, they would have made him manager because that's how good he was. And that sort of, I was gobsmacked when I heard that because I knew he was at Southampton, but I didn't even put two and two together. So I think Ralph Hasenhüttl lent heavily on him. He was obviously assistant to Hans Flick at Germany and Bayern, so he's got so much pedigree behind him. I think already in coaching. Doesn't always translate to being a manager. We know that, but he's also someone that you have to feel connected to your manager. I think I've had too many times as a Rangers fan where I just don't feel connected. When Bill come in, he started off really well. I had no connection to Michael Beale. So the first side it started to struggle. I was obviously on his case like a lot of people were. Whereas Danny Röhl, I feel like there is a connection with him and the fans. He does understand. I don't want to say he gets it, but do you know what I mean? He can connect with the fans. He does go out of his way to uphold traditions, I guess, is to say the suit and the brogues and everything. But in reality, it's like he is making that connection to the fans. He's getting you on board with what he's doing. And if you want that to succeed, you're going to be more patient. If you're more patient, you're not getting on the players' backs, and it's not becoming toxic all the time. And the players I think are really benefiting it because in the long run, when I look at teams, I remember Postecoglou's team. There was a time where they weren't playing great and they were getting a lot of late goals, but that builds momentum. And after a while, teams stop thinking, "Oh, well, they've won 4 games really late and really luckily." They just go, "They've won 15 in a row." You're almost beaten before you go out and play that team, but just because the monster wins they've got on the board. So it's all about building momentum. So we're not playing well at the moment, but if we win the league, no one will remember that. Everyone will just remember that we turned it around and we won the league. So that's all we got to hope. But to sort of back to your earlier point is, I think it's Hearts, Celtic or Rangers, whoever it is I think it's all going to be hinged on what happens in this window.
Yeah, I mean, you can only control what you can control, and it's not to copy the Nancy graph that he put up on his Twitter page. Things that you care about or things that you can't control. Here's what does matter. On that case, Rangers just need to obviously sharpen up in the January window. But there's elements out with a control, Hearts, but probably more important, and I mean that in the most respectful way, because again, Hearts are still this underdog side in my eyes. With Celtic, very turbulent time. Nancy out the door. I don't think anyone here is surprised. For me, it was actually more of a surprise that he was appointed in the first place, given the fact that his main sort of established achievements all came through the MLS, and I've seen plenty of the MLS to know that the standards are way off compared to European football. So, and I think it's quite clear. I think it's not going to be long until we see players of this current Celtic team go and open goal and tell us some absolutely wacky stories behind the scenes, because it didn't look like he had the dressing room at all. So I don't think anyone's going to say they've got it wrong. I think we're all going to be unanimous in saying that this was probably the right call for Celtic. Is O'Neill coming in till the end of the season the best choice to take? And if not, where should they be looking, or at the very least the summertime, regardless of what happens at the end of the season? Because obviously O'Neill, he's not going to be lasting forever. He was meant to be retired by now. He was already retired. So what's our thoughts on that then, with Nancy leaving Celtic and O'Neill coming in?
I think that it's definitely the right decision from Celtic. I think you saw when he came in on the interim, the immediate impact he got a Johnny Kenny. He got him firing. He got a few goals under Martin O'Neill, and that's important for a striker that's inexperienced and has had struggle with this start of this season anyway under Rodgers, and he don't think he's scored too many goals under Nancy either. But just a manager that does the basics right, gets the basics right. If you're a side that's meant to be dominating the ball and meant to be dominating possession and expecting to win games, if you can do the basics right, you've got the players in your squad to outplay the mass majority of games. Probably Hearts and Rangers are the two that you're going to have your tough matches against. And to be honest, Motherwell as well this season. So if you can get a manager that understands the basics and obviously his coaching staff as well, that will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting, just given his age and things. But if you have a real command and authority in the dressing room, which Martin O'Neill has, and I don't think Nonce ever really had that commanding voice. And I think you can tell that from his press conference, and I think the writing was on the wall during his 10-minute monologue in pre-match press conference where he was so defensive. And I think as soon as you're a manager going on the defensive, you're fighting against not just the media, but against the dressing room as well. And I think that was very telling, that when you have to put across your points of view so much, it's almost like you're not preaching to the media, but you're preaching to the players through the media. And I think, yeah, there was certainly a lot to. You can't. What I don't understand is, regardless of systems, is if you're a team of good players, how can you go from being so dominant to so hopeless? Like, surely you're okay. You're asking to play a different way, but surely you can just do your basic jobs right and continue that standard of performance that you had under O'Neill in the first place. But yeah, that was certainly interesting. But when you're playing players out of position, McCowan at wing back and Yang at wing back, obviously Yang got the goal on Saturday and it was a pretty good goal, but him defensively is just, that's not his job. His job is to get on the ball, use his pace to try and get balls in the box or shots on target. And you show that if playing him, as a 7 or 11 out wide, he'll do that. But when you're trying to ask him to cover back and track back his runner, that's not his game. So you maybe would have got away with that in the MLS, but in Europe, you're not going to get out of playing people out of position.
Now, what we used to as well. Is O'Neill the right man to come in? You talk about, obviously, they're already looking backwards. They brought in a manager from 20 years ago, and they're obviously trying to bring back Kyogo. Seems to be the shell shock story of the day, according to the tabloids. Doesn't normally always work out. There is a kind of saying that the second time isn't really the answer, and that is, I think, most of the time true. I would agree with that. It's not just exclusive to Rangers. That's kind of across the board with football. How do you see this working out, and just how big of a job has he really got? Because obviously, there's been issues with, or at least perceived issues with the Celtic board not funding enough for legitimate transfers. They've not replaced key players. At this rate, they're replacing Martin O'Neill with Martin O'Neill, and they're replacing Kyogo Furuhashi with Kyogo Furuhashi.
Yeah, it's listen, I can't. I'm enjoying it at the moment. I won't lie, but it's enjoyment as a Rangers fan never lasts too long. So I wouldn't be surprised if he turns it around. I think it's the right appointment. Certainly in the short term, it's. I think as a fan, and I've been there before when we've made those interim appointments at the end of the season. I don't like it because you want that manager to come in and get his own stamp on it. But if you do that, are you giving up the league because the manager wants to come in and do his own style? January notoriously difficult to then bring in players that are going to fit long term into something you want to do. Certainly a number of players anyway, maybe one or two. I think just the fact that he does know the club, he's been there this season as well, so he knows those players. They've already been playing for him. I just think it was the one. And listen, I think he's a figurehead. I think it's sort of Maloney and Fotheringham that are going to be doing the coaching and basically all the tactics will go through them. Martin O'Neill will have a say, but I think it's a decent enough team between them and having someone like him that knows football inside out. So, yeah, I can't. Unfortunately, I think it's the safest appointment they could have made. Possibly, maybe the appointment they should have made to the end of the season in the first place when Rodgers left, because he had them playing. They just had that result away at Feyenoord, and I know Feyenoord are sort of going for a bit of a difficult time, but they played really well. out in the Netherlands, so they done really well there. In terms of the run he was on, I think it started really well, and then again, that's what I talk about. People don't really remember the performances when you're winning. St Mirren, I remember, had a really good game against Celtic, lost in the last kick of the game with that McGregor screamer, and I think because I remember Sam saying that. Was it that they've played 3 times and lost 3 times, and Celtic have been ahead for 3 minutes or something stupid like that in all 3 games. So, and in the Hibs game, they were 2-0 up. It was 2-1, and Hibs were banging on the door. They edged Dundee out 1-0. Obviously, that was probably a little bit more comfortable than the St Mirren game, but it wasn't fantastic as much as I think people were remembering. And that's what I'm saying with Rangers as well. It's like if you're watching the performances, they're not great, but if you're getting results, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. You're just sort of, you're plastering it over the cracks or papering over the cracks, sorry, just to get through to a point where you can then fix it properly. I can't. I think it's going to, again, it is, like I said earlier, it's going to depend on who they get in January as well. Obviously, Kyogo, again, I don't know if they're sort of looking at this as, do we just go back and get these guys because they know what it means to win for Celtic, and therefore just for this season we'll get it in, we'll get this title over the line, and then we'll sort of, we'll do the rebuild in the summer and we'll get it all sorted properly. Is that going to work? Because Kyogo's coming in on no confidence. I don't think he's even scored since he left Celtic. Maybe a cup goal or something, I think, since he left Celtic.
Yeah, he scored 1 goal for Birmingham, I think across like 30 appearances, and it came against the second string Sheffield United team in the Carabao Cup. But saying that, for me, it kind of looks across, like, obviously O'Neill will have been watching Celtic through his work in the media and whatnot, and he's obviously very heavily involved with Celtic on like a personal level. So he was watching like a fan. So it kind of feels like it's a fan's take almost, that he's watched that and said, well, you know what? I didn't agree with Kyogo leaving at the time. I didn't feel that maybe Brendan Rodgers would get the best out of him. Bring him back because I think I know how to get the best out of him, because really he's kind of a system player with Ange Postecoglou, because he wasn't even recording anywhere near the same levels under Rodgers. So it maybe is just a case of O'Neill, again, it's like a fan's take. He's looked at that and said he was managed all wrong the past little while. Let me have a go at this, because he's still only about 30 years old, or maybe he's just hit 31. I think he's still got plenty in the tank.
Yeah, I absolutely think he's got plenty in the tank. I saw that today. Actually, I think he turns 31 this month, and that surprised me a little bit. I was actually, because he looks young, doesn't he? He plays like he's got all that bags of pace, and you might, as a football manager player, you expect at 30 that they can't run anymore basically, so they're time to get rid of him. I was sorry.
He looks like a K-pop star with the
that's it. Yeah, he's just, I think. Certainly, like, if you told me Maeda was older, I'd believe it, because usually he's got the shaved head, the little goatee, he looks a lot older, whereas Kyogo looks like a young player, and he's certainly got plenty of pace and as we've seen before, finishing ability. You're not going to lose that in the space of a year, but he's coming in with a bit of rustiness. I think they've got Jota coming back at the end of the month from injury, but again, he's going to have to be phased into this team. So Kieran Tierney, injury prone. There's a lot hinging on players and whether their bodies can cope with the season. I think they're going to need more than Kyogo. It'd be a good start. Listen, if they got Martin O'Neill back to the end of the season, and if they get Kyogo in the next couple of days, it'll give everyone at the club a big boost, which is maybe what they're looking for. Just the fans are at odds with the board. They were at odds with the team for a little bit, and I think it's, if you can sort of get a few quick wins, then that's all you need sometimes, just to sort of light that fire and get everything rolling again. And I think they'll sign a fair few in this window, if I'm honest. But it'd be interesting to see. There was another story coming out apparently that Kyogo actually wants to prove himself at Birmingham. So Lord knows what's going on at the moment with Celtic. But there's plenty of interest from what we're seeing in the papers of who they want to bring in, and it's exciting. And obviously Hearts then are just going under the radar, getting their business done, and no one's talking about it, and we know how good that Jamestown analytics is. So it's going to be very exciting, I think. Really, really exciting for the end of the season. That is, unfortunately, my time is up, so I'm going to have to drop off the pod, but I know everyone is in good hands with Ethan and Josh, so I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of it as well. So cheers, thanks very much for having me, guys.
No problem, Stu. Thanks.
Cheers, Stu.
I think we're alone now. So yeah, probably a good time now to move on because it's almost half an hour. We'll talk about the Old Firm, and listen, there'll be plenty more to talk about as the season goes on. So we're going to move over to your area of expertise, Josh. I want an update on Falkirk because the last I checked, they went to Pittodrie and delivered a sucker punch to Aberdeen. They got a visit from the McGlynn Reaper as he's costed Jimmy Talleen his job. He's given him his books and said, right, off you pop. And now Talleen departing Aberdeen. That's the major sort of story going on over there. They're looking for a new manager. And Talleen is already in a new job, I believe, in Sweden. But first, Falkirk, tell me about the performance and how have things been since I last caught up with Falkirk, which was the game at Dens Park, obviously. I think, was it just after Christmas?
Yeah, just after Christmas. So we bounced back from that defeat. Thanks for reminding me of that one, Ethan. But no, there was Falkirk were going through a spell, and it was 1 goal in 6 games. And the media had said, "No, goals have dried up." Ross McKeever going down against Kilmarnock. Just I think it was October time was a big loss for Falkirk, having to rely on 38-year-old Brian Graham to play 90 minutes, and he was brought in as a player to really see out games in the last 20 minutes and use all his experience, and maybe he did it against St Mirren, got a goal back against St Mirren earlier on the season, and he's done well in spells. He obviously got that winner against Kilmarnock a few weeks ago, and he was just looking a bit tired out there, and he needed a bit of a breather from being the main man. And obviously, with it being January, you could recall Barney Stewart from his loan spell across the water at our rivals Dunfermline, who had banged in 8 goals in 12 games for the Fifers. So he came back into the starting lineup and just injected a real youthful, energetic performance for a boy that played, 7th tier football 12 months ago to a player playing his first Premiership match. You can tell what a journey he's been on because some of his touches were immaculate, just bringing the ball down back to goal, holding off his man. I think he was up against Jack Milne for a lot of the game as well. Just holding the ball up, dishing it off to the wings for Calvin Miller and Carell Wilson, who two players that had an excellent game. The strange decision for me from Talleen was he played Shinnie left back up against Carell Wilson, who isn't just one of the fastest players in the Falkirk team, but probably one of the fastest players in the league. Wherever he gets motoring, he's an absolute rocket down that right hand side. So a lot of Falkirk's joy came down the wings. Aberdeen just looked a team out of ideas. Whenever they had the ball, Carlson was playing right central at the weekend. They would try and fizz the ball into him, and he would just be trying to get things in the half turn. But I've got to shout out centre halves Liam Henderson, Connor Allen, who stepped out of defence with confidence to take the ball off Carlson or Nesbitt, whoever was dropping deep to get the ball. They were getting matched by their centre half and just intercepted. And one of the best chances of the first half did come from Liam Henderson stepping out, taking the ball off Nesbitt, playing a 1-2 ball out wide. He then continues to run at the box, and he probably could have done a bit better if his header he glanced it wide. But if he makes solid contact, then it could have been an opening goal. And Aberdeen really didn't test Scott Bain at all in the whole match. Their only chance really came just on the stroke of half time. Nesbitt had a run in behind, and from a goal kick that he blazed over the bar. But I think, given the performance, I'm not surprised Talleen got sacked because Falkirk's goal came from a set piece. The organisation was poor. Ball into the back post at the 6-yard box, and there's Philip Lissa on loan from Swansea City bullets the header past Mitov, and he was unmarked. But there was 2 or 3 Falkirk players unmarked, so if Lissa wasn't there, there could have been 2 or 3 others waiting to get on the end of it. So I'm really not surprised Talleen's been shown the door. It's been a pretty poor season from him.
Yeah, there's quite a few notes there. We'll start with Aberdeen and get back to Falkirk, because with Aberdeen, I'm not surprised he's been sacked. I mean, you just said yourself that they looked like a team that were exhausted of options. They didn't really know where to go next. A lot of them, and when I say them, a lot of Aberdeen fans have suggested that he's only lasted this long because he won the Cup last season. And if it weren't for the Cup triumph, he would have been out well before now. Because the truth is, that's a team that's had a lot of investment. placed into it. You talk about Carlson on the ball. Carlson's a very difficult player to stop, but naturally so. He was like an eight. I think am I right in saying he was £800,000, as was Keskinen. I think he was maybe perhaps one of their players. Maybe it was Carlson. Maybe I'm wrong. One of the players they brought in had previously went through Udinese for I think €6 million. Not that affects what Aberdeen spent on them, obviously, but Aberdeen have had plenty of investment in that squad, and they've really failed to kick on from last season. I mean, last season, obviously, they started off tremendously well in this winning streak, then they ended the season brutally. And it's like they've just never been able to kind of get out that slump, really. They're closer to the likes of Dundee in the bottom six than they are the likes of Hibs in the top six, and that's kind of where they want to be. They want to be competing with Hibs and Hearts and that. So yeah, if they're exhausted of all options, and Talline's kind of lost his grasp, if he's failed to really build on the foundations that were placed for this heavy investment, then it probably is the right call to let him move on to pastures new and bring in someone else, bring in someone fresh. I mean, it worked out obviously overall. You can't deny the fact that they brought in this manager from Scandinavia that comes in and wins them a major honour. Their first major honour since 2014, their first Scottish Cup, I think, since I'm going to say that the mid 90s. I want maybe early 90s. So it's been successful overall. It's a simple one of those, thanks to the memories, but time to go. And I think because he's gotten this new job so quickly, it was perhaps more of a mutual sort of feeling rather than Aberdeen necessarily giving him the boot. Yeah, I think he must have seen this one coming. And I think that's everything I had in my mind for Aberdeen. If not, we can maybe come back to it. But with Falkirk, I just want to say, I predicted Falkirk would be a bit of a surprise package this season, but I still didn't expect them to be doing as well as they're doing now in the top six. I expect them to be very similar to the Tony Docherty team of Dundee last season. Very good going forward, scoring lots of goals, but perhaps a bit too open at the back. But if anything, it kind of seems to be in reverse, that Falkirk seem to be really solid at the back. And really, as you say, going forward, maybe a bit more of an issue. But Brian Graham, I think the last goal I think I caught him scoring was at Tannadice. He seemed to really enjoy that one. But I think things are going all right for Falkirk at the moment. And from what I recall in the summer, there was a bit of a panic about a lack of activity in the transfer window. There was at one point the rumour mill was completely dry. How are things looking in January just now? Is it still more or less the same, or are you expecting some more incomings to really build on what looks to be a fantastic season, a fantastic debut season back in the Premiership?
Absolutely. If we just go back to the summer transfer window, when the league started, I think our only additions had been Lewis Nielsen on loan from Hearts, and also Brian Graham. And those were the only two additions to the squad for the opening day. So there was panic of the squad's not deep enough, not enough experience. Oh, and Scott Bain, of course, well, who's been excellent. We'll get on to him shortly. But we managed to get a few loan deals towards the end of the window. We got two on loan from Swansea. Philip Lissa, obviously the goal scorer, in the game winner on Saturday. He is a centre half by trade, but he's spent most of his time either at left back or right back, and to be honest, seems to be thriving out in a wide position because he's got so much pace that whenever a winger tries to take him on, he can just, even if they get the half yard on him, he closes the gap so quickly and can stop the cross. A real strong player as well. Loves a good meaty challenge and can fly out of nowhere and get blocks in. So a real talent. I think he's been in the SPFL's team of the week 2 or 3 times now. Superb player defensively and going forward as well. He's got a good passing range. His crossing can sometimes let him down. Obviously, when he was playing at left back, he was inverting in the midfield and spraying these long diags, and it was lovely. Now he's moved over to right back since Keelan Adams got injured, and it's just working his way back to fitness. His crossing can sometimes be overhit, but he gets in great areas, and obviously good in the air. He took his header so well. His Swansea City teammate Carell Wilson, again I told you, really fast, direct, one of the best dribblers off the ball in the team. He gets himself in good areas. He got a goal against Aberdeen the third game of the season, the winner there. Hasn't scored. Don't think he's assisted since then either. so doesn't have the numbers, but he makes such an impact. And sometimes when you've got a player with such pace just driving at you constantly, it can wear teams down defensively. He's been unlucky a few times. He's rounded goalkeepers and got shots away, and defenders have come in on the line with their hands tucked into their chest, and it's been disallowed. No penalty given. So he's had a few chances like that he's created from not a lot in previous games, but he's a real talent. And then Ethan Williams as well, on loan from Man United, who came in in the summer, who he's dropped to the bench in recent weeks, but when he comes on, he makes an impact. And when he started, he's looked great. Can use both feet. He's one of the only players I've seen that can take a corner left and right footed and have no impact on his just a two footed talent. So can play anywhere across the three and behind. And those players have really drove Falkirk forward into. It's been quite a weird season because it's been the start of the season was a struggle. Then we went in that run where I think we picked up points in like 9 of 13 games. We picked up points, and then we played Hibs and Hearts back to back and struggled to pick up points. Lost 2 in a row. Things were looking a bit dull, but now we've picked up 6 points from 9, and it's looking better again. Going into a tough match against St Mirren on Saturday, the boys are now be confident they can go there and put on a good performance. You've got obviously Barney Stewart back, who just energy up front. He's great in the air, can hold the ball up, and you've got your wide players that with pace can get balls into the box to him, and Brad Spencer and Dylan Tate, who have really proved a lot of doubters wrong in centre midfield, that they can hold their own. Dylan Tate especially had a lot of question marks, having not made the grade at Hibs. But he's really proven doubters wrong. His passing ability, his ability to buy fouls from tight situations is also beneficial to us. I think he's now the most fouled player in the league, Dylan Tate, just by winning these. Similar to Cammy Devlin, just in the midfield, being gritty, being brave, putting his body where it hurts, and winning fouls and winning possession, allowing Falkirk to move 20, 30 yards forward.
Well, there's another question I'm going to ask you about a former Falkirk player now. Obviously, looking at the January window, there's some wages freed up with the departure of Scott Arfield, who I would imagine would have been one of the more handsomely paid players within the Falkirk squad. Is it the right move? Am I right in saying that he's maybe just not featured as much as he would like to have this season back in the Premiership? Of course, he's kind of getting on to an age as well where he probably can't play a full 90 minutes either. He still obviously has quality in what he brings, but I think in this Falkirk team, it looks like it's more than just quality. They're needing legs. They're needing a lot more grit.
Yeah, I think Arfield's been a little bit unlucky that we lost McKeever so early, because when obviously Arfield being 38, Brian Graham being 38, playing them as a 9-10 partnership just wasn't working. We needed legs in there. We needed likes of Finn Yates, who's come in kind of the 10 role, who's normally played further back, just for his ability to cover ground and support in the press. He showed what he could do against Motherwell in the 2-1 win, where he was just the right place, right time, kind of on the half volley, could send that past the goalkeeper and won us that match. But just if it was failing to make an impact in games, he was coming on, he would be doing 2 or 3 things really well, and then getting further forward and not being able to get on the end of balls, or just not making the impact that he would have wanted to make. He wasn't getting the game time he would have wanted. When you're a player late in your career, you want to get minutes and legs and enjoy your football. And if you're struggling to get into the match when you're on the pitch, your confidence goes. You're not going to enjoy your football. And I think it was a sensible decision all round. John McGlynn, obviously a very honest manager. He calls it as he sees it. He came out in the press and said, there was no fallout. It was an honest conversation between the two. Arfield asking for more game time, McGlynn saying he couldn't guarantee it, and we thank Scott for his return. 9 goals and 13 in the Championship to help us get over the line, and also I think the impact he had in the dressing room to knit the boys together, and even to show some of the younger players, towards last season, players like Calvin Miller, Ethan Ross would get great chances and blaze them over the bar, or put them wide. And then once he came in, the finishing of the team improved in general. I think Scott Arfield was getting, leading finishing practices, showing, younger players the technique, how to strike the ball under pressure to, keep it on target, force the goalie to make saves or, put them under pressure. And I think his ability to, nurture young talent has maybe gone under the radar. And his coaching ability from the pitch as well was impressive. So I think he had his part to play this season, probably more on the training pitch than on a match day. Obviously, he got that winner, but good move from both sides, I think, to free up some wages to potentially bring in another player or even a loan signing and give Scott Arfield a chance to get game time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what a career he's had as well. I mean, full on. I remember him at Burnley very well. In the Premier League doing bits, and of course, even at Rangers at more sort of matured age, wasn't that long ago he'd put them a goal up against Liverpool in the Champions League, albeit they end up getting completely scalped. So on Aberdeen then, with Jimmy Tilleen sacked, I've not really seen any of the front runner names. I've seen that Shaba Laszlo had applied for the job, which, I absolutely adore the audacity. I rate it. That's like me trying to fire myself into Megan Fox's DMs. Um, but who is there anyone in your mind that kind of stands out as a standout candidate? There's not really anyone. I've got one name I'd like to float out. But I want your take on it first.
Obviously, the media are going to flood to names like Askew from Motherwell, who I
Yeah,
think there's no chance to take that job. There's no chance. It would make no sense when you're building
agreed.
something at a club that you're adored by their fans, you're adored by the media, to make that sideways slash this season downward move for maybe a little bit more cash, where you're not getting job security, which you've probably built at Motherwell now, would be a silly move. Also think the price on the compensation would be high. So I think we can discount that one. The other attractive name at the moment, Stephen Robinson from St Mirren. Obviously, he's just won the League Cup with them, but they're struggling in the league. Would that be a right time for Robinson to say, I've took you as far as I could go with 3 top 5 finishes or top 6 finishes and a cup to seal your name as a legend in the managerial status at St Mirren? Potentially. Also, he's the counter opposite of what they tried in Tulane, where a manager from a foreign league, an unknown that can play a certain type of way. Stephen Robinson is very, he's got a way that like to play. It's not always the prettiest, but it's pretty effective, and
Yeah,
he's a manager that knows how to get results.
yeah,
So
he's set in his ways.
and he knows how to get the best out of certain players, and he'll have a system that benefits the team rather than individual players. So he's a player that he's a manager that has track record at Motherwell and at St Mirren of getting good results. So he'll probably be interested in the job. Whether or not it's the right time, I'm not sure. I think Aberdeen might be cautious last time they took a St Mirren manager of the consequences. There's been talk of John McGlynn. I don't think he'd be interested in that, but maybe saying that out of hope rather than out of knowledge. The name that I have been thinking about is the potential if we can get Robbie Nielsen in the picture.
That's
He's been
exactly
doing
who I was going
well
to say.
as a coach over, I think it's in Belgium. He's
Yeah,
been assistant manager. I liked his Dundee United side. Thought and his time at Hearts as well. I thought he's a good coach, good manager. Speaks well. He's got a good balance of being tight at the back and playing some expansive stuff. So he might be a good avenue to explore.
yeah, that was exactly the name I was going to float out. More so on the basis that he's managed a similar size of club in the form of Hearts, and by all accounts, very good career at Hearts as well. Done what he had to do. When they're in the Championship, he simply got them out. First time asking, even when Rangers and Hibs were there, just no problem, got them back up. In the Premiership, they were always kind of finishing third, getting into cup finals, which is what Aberdeen sort of were, or even a step further, they're finishing second, obviously, with the absence of Rangers, and even finishing second with Rangers back in the league for one of those seasons. So that's the kind of thing they've got to tally up is, would they take that back, that sort of Derek McInnes years, but you're also then having to sacrifice the expansive style of play, because the whole point that McInnes left, it wasn't so much success related, it was to do with the style of play. So they kind of have to regress back into that mold if they go for a Robbie Nielsen. If assuming Nielsen would be guaranteeing them the same result, it's never a guarantee in football, of course, but going off his track record, you'd fancy him to do so. And yeah, with Stephen Robinson, similarly, again, obviously set in his ways too. What I will say is St Mirren fans seem to think it's derogatory when you refer to them as a well-organised side, which I don't fully understand. I think they are a very well-organised side. Everyone knows exactly the role they've got to do. But there is the odd individual that they probably feel that doesn't get enough of credit. There is players that have a license of expression in that St Mirren side. I was a big fan of Alessandro when he was there. I really like Killian Phillips, who of course was formerly of Aberdeen. There's Conor McMenamin, and there's a couple of players that like to show a bit of flair. Indalulu being another one that get to show their flair and be a bit more direct. And again, if that's I think they could do a lot worse than Stephen Robinson. We'll put it that way. But again, it's maybe a bit too similar to Derek McInnes to that extent as well. McInnes was very much a very well organised side. They could win games in a very ugly manner, but at the same time, in their peak, they had some fabulous players that, when they were allowed to express themselves, were a joy to watch. That front three of Hayes, McGinn, and Rooney specifically come to mind. And after they sort of parted ways, there was still more coming through, the likes of Ryan Christie and James Maddison. They were getting bums off seats. So yeah, Nielsen and Robinson are sort of the two that I would kind of first come to mind, but again, they're both quite similar in this exchange, and I'm not sure that's a choice Aberdeen will be willing to commit to. I think for them, it's more about having the expansive style as opposed to someone with a bit of a better track record. I mean, that was the whole point of appointing Stephen Glass in the first place, and albeit that didn't work out, I think they're going to look for a similar avenue. It's similar to how when Hibs appointed Nick Montgomery, that's what they're hoping for. It was kind of like the Anjoff wish was what they're hoping for. It didn't really work out that way. But every club, I think, that they're trying to be creative, they're trying to be ahead of the curve, and rightly so. Rightly so. And Aberdeen shouldn't be any different, because I think really, even if they got someone like, let's say they appoint Robbie Nielsen and they get a very good finish in the league and they get back into Europe, they'll then be saying, right, okay, well, how do we improve in Europe? Which has been a massive deal for them. Tallinn couldn't improve them for Europe. McInnes couldn't improve them in Europe. They're itching to kind of hit that next step. I don't think they simply want this repetitive cycle of getting back into a European place. They want to be able to expand. So yeah, I don't know where they'll go. I'm gonna bid that they go out with the Scottish merry-go-round, because as I said, they went with that with Tallinn, and on the face of it, Tallinn is still a massive success based on winning the Scottish Cup for me. But yeah, an interesting one to watch to see how that advances. There's been a managerial appointment elsewhere in the league. Neil McCann has gotten the Kilmarnock job. Now, interestingly, it looked for certain that Robbie Nielsen was at the job, so that maybe there is some truth to that. We never know. Maybe Nielsen was set to go to Killie, and maybe Aberdeen have tapped him up. We'll soon find out. It kind of felt like with the club statement Kilmarnock issued, they were going to appoint someone that knows the club, and I was actually expecting it to be someone like Aberdeen's current caretaker, Peter Levin, that had played for Kilmarnock previously in his playing career. I thought there was maybe an indication it could have been Tony Docherty, despite his failure at Ross County, assistant manager under Derek McInnes over there, or potentially Stephen Naismith, again familiar with the club having played there, still without a job since being manager at Hearts. But to everyone's surprise, they've went for Neil McCann, who, to my knowledge, has no prior experience with Kilmarnock as a football club. And there seems to be a very stirred reaction, mainly negative on social media. Now, Neil McCann is obviously someone I know very well in terms of his coaching and management career. I would like to hear your initial thoughts on the appointment, Josh. And once you give me your initial thoughts, I'm going to riff through the sort of main basis of his coaching career. And I'm going to see if maybe, if I can change your mind a little bit on the appointment, assuming I know your position to begin with.
Yeah, I thought it was a rather uninspiring appointment. Again, it's I believe he was part of the Barry Ferguson's makeup as the coaching staff.
Yeah,
and obviously, Billy Dodds as well has joined him as assistant manager. So you've got their experience. Last few months of last season was so obviously at Rangers. So he's not been out the game for a long time. He's got experience. So you can say, okay, he can work with the players there. He's got that coaching background. They need a lot of work, those players. They look like they don't know what they're doing. We played them recently, and out with John Jules up front, Kilmarnock don't look a great side. They certainly need to sort their goalkeeping department out. But in terms of, we go back on the Neil McCann, he's not the sexy appointment, but at the same time, I think they could have gone with a worse option as well. He's kind of like opinion. I think they could have done a bit better, could have done a bit worse. So, yeah.
Well, here's what I can lay out to you. So, I've got my notes all prepared, and I think he actually takes up the vast majority of them. Because I actually, whilst I was doing my research as well, just to make sure I didn't make any mistakes, I found a couple of things that I didn't quite fully appreciate. So starting off, we'll go straight into the management career itself. I'll touch on the assistant manager roles, because he was actually assistant manager with Dunfermline at the very start of things back in 2012. But he initially steadied the ship at Dundee with an awful time under Paul Hartley. So Paul Hartley had built a very decent Dundee team in the Premiership, but then come his final season, he had lost too many gems that he couldn't replace, and we fell into this habit. I think we went, was it 6 consecutive games getting beat. He'd set a new record for himself, and then in the same season, he broke that record, getting beat like 7 or 8 consecutive games. In the same campaign. One of those games was a 7-0 home defeat to Aberdeen, and he simply went to the press and said that he was kind of out of ideas. So it was no surprise to see that he was sacked shortly after. I mean, his grand change of plan was to simply swap the left back and the right back around, and that was kind of it. And then it made obviously no difference. So Neil McCann came in and steadied the ship at Dundee. We're in a relegation battle. We were on the verge of finishing in the top 6 before the split. We beat Motherwell 5-1 away. We beat Rangers 2-1 at home. And we've somehow got into this relegation battle. But Neil McCann came in. He steadied the ship. He got told that you'll have, I think, just 3 to 5 games, or 5 to 7 games to save the club. And he done it in 3. He won the first 2. And we were sorted. It didn't look like he was going to take the job full on. But then, of course, he did. And we'll cycle back to that in just a moment, because elsewhere, this is a common theme. Kilmarnock are obviously going through a bit of a brutal time, so he's got to come in to steady the ship. Well, he's done it once with Dundee. He's done it with Inverness. He was the caretaker manager there. I think John Robertson had some personal issues, so he couldn't carry on. He went over to Inverness and had 16 games in charge, signed Scott Allen, managed to bring him through the door, obviously from previous experience coaching him at Dundee. And across those 16 games, Inverness were only beaten in 4 of them, winning 6, including a Scottish Cup tie away to Premiership rivals, or then Premiership rivals, Ross County, which is still to date the last time the two clubs have met each other. So they were underdogs in that game away from home against a Premiership side, and they got a 3-1 victory. You'll remember Daniel Mackay was the star man. It was in front of the BBC cameras. But those 4 defeats came against Hearts and Dundee, who were the Championship's top 2 sides that season, that went on to win promotion to the Premiership. And the other 2 defeats was St Mirren away in the Scottish Cup Premiership side. They were initially leading, but lost to a last-minute Marcus Fraser goal. So then you look at that, across the 4 defeats, 3 of them, you're kind of like, well, yeah, you can't really gripe at that. That's games that are expected to get beaten. And then there's a 1-0 home defeat to Morton. So only 1 out of the 4 you can really have a gripe at over a 16-game stretch. And as you correctly mentioned, assistant manager to Barry Ferguson at Rangers, where again, it was a job where they had to come in a turbulent time and bring some stability, steady the ship. My favourite saying this episode, it would appear. That was 15 games, defeated 4 times, 2 of which were in Europe, and one of them being one of the legs against Fenerbahce where they went through. So again, not really a real defeat, if you know what I mean. And they famously won at Parkhead 3-2, and then drew against Celtic in the split. And we'll come back to why I've mentioned that in just a moment. On the second page now. We're almost there, I promise. Neil McCann's first full season at Dundee, we played some excellent football. A lot of fans said it was the best football we played since the Ivano Benetti era, when we had the likes of Claudio Caniggia, Fabian Caballero, Juan Sara, Georgi Namsadze. We created so much, but we just couldn't score. It was actually really impressive. And just to kind of remind you guys exactly what that team looked like, that was a Dundee team with Glenn Kamara in the heart of midfield, alongside aforementioned Scott Allen pulling the creative, Mark O'Hara and Paul McGowan involved, the skillful Rory Deakin, Faisal El Baktui on the wings. Jack Hendry was the star player at centre half, and when he was sold to Celtic, replaced by English internationalist Stephen Cocker. We even had a Europa League finalist and twice Copa del Rey finalist at left back, Basque left back John Artanechi, formerly of Atletico Bilbao. And the feeling was we just needed a striker in this team to convert all these chances we're creating, and we would have taken off. Well, we had Sofian Musa, who infamously could not finish his dinner. But for me, I really liked him. I thought he went massively under the radar for how exceptionally strong he was. He was good at hold-up play, link-up play. I just felt like he had to play alongside a goal scorer, and there would have been some success there. And according to the assistant manager at the time, Graham Gartland, we missed out on Ivan Toney on loan from Newcastle United. Missed out on Caden Jackson from Accrington Stanley, who went on to sign for Ipswich Town for £1 million, and Macaulay Bonne, Macaulay Bonne, who was going for fun at Leyton Orient, who went on to play for QPR, Ipswich Town, and Charlton Athletic. And the exchange was we ended up getting Simon Murray in the door. So we got our striker, but the problem was it was at the expense of Scott Allen going back to Hibs in a famous triangular series of loan deals. Scott Bain went to Celtic on loan. Jack Hendry signed for Celtic permanently. We got Murray on loan from Hibs as a result. I feel like there's another deal that I'm missing in there. But Scott Allen was recalled to Celtic to then sign on loan to Hibs. That's how that worked out. But the point I'm getting to here was this first full season, this was a Dundee team with a lot of substance, and we all kind of felt that McCann, in this sense, was a bit of a prospect, that if he could just get the right players in, we were really going to shoot, because it felt in that season we really could have done some serious damage had we just had one or two more players in the door to get things clicking. And I certainly believe that. So Kilmarnock fans can listen to that and maybe sense some optimism. So the question then is, where did it go wrong? Where did it go wrong at Dundee? Because to the outsider, what you'll remember is Dundee were just kind of getting beat all the time under McCann. Specifically in that second season, it was the recruitment. It took a turn for the worse. So to address the striker situation again, which just kind of sums it all up, Simon Murray was only on loan from Hibs at the time. So he's back at Hibs. Dundee don't keep him on. Was signed Jean Allison Mendy, who is one of the worst strikers I think ever seen to play for Dundee. He had a decent record in Norway's second tier, but after less than 300 minutes of Premiership football, he was binned. So the striker situation had to be addressed several times in the same summer window, because then Kenny Miller was signed from Rangers at 38 years old to be our main marksman, and he never actually scored under Neil McCann. He didn't start scoring until McCann was already sacked, and Jim McIntyre came through the door. We then signed Pakistani striker Adil Nabi after a successful trial from Peterborough, and he looked actually quite tidy and was finally coming on to a game and scored his first goal for the club against Kilmarnock, which was subsequently Neil McCann's last game. So just as Nabi seems to be kind of coming on to something, McCann was already out the door. All this was also at the expense of Craig Whiten, who was a big Dundee prospect at the time, because suddenly the shape of the team was too narrow to accommodate for wingers, which seemed to be his primary position. So we sold him off to Hearts, and it kicked us in the teeth, because as soon as McCann was sacked, we reverted to try and spread out the team a bit more, and suddenly we had no wingers to play. And there was also Benjamin Kalman, who was signed on loan with an option to buy, who now currently plays in Germany's second tier, Hannover 96, and the Finnish national team. He scored in the 2-2 draw at Hampden between Scotland and Finland. Scores plenty of goals now, but at the time, he was viewed as this sort of development signing, and he looked promising, but simply did not have the time that he thought he would get, which sums up Neil McCann in this season. He thought he had so much more time than he had, because the squad was... This is just the strikers we're talking about, for fuck's sake. The rest of the team, it was very much the same trend. Was signed too many foreign project signings that simply didn't have enough time to adapt to the league. And there was other players, Karol Madianga, Elton Ingwatala, they came, they saw, they fucked off. They were all expelled under Jim McIntyre once he was through the door, with the exception of Kenny Miller. Kenny Miller was kept on. I'll save you on the rest of the squad and leave you with the simple synopsis that when Stephen Cocker had left in the summer, he was replaced by Ryan Innes, who looked like Stephen Cocker, was as big as Stephen Cocker, was nowhere near as good as Stephen Cocker. He's one of the worst centre-halves I've seen play for Dundee. Absolutely woeful. And we bought Jack Hamilton from Hearts 2, the goalkeeper, on a 3-year deal. And for each of those 3 years in the second half of the season, we had to sign a new goalkeeper to replace him. We had Sene Jiang on loan in the first season, Connor Hazard on loan in the second, and then Adam Legzdon's permanently in the third. So recruitment was a massive problem for Neil McCann in his second spell. And what was so annoying was he doubled down on it. Michael Stewart challenged him on this on Sports Sound, and McCann doubled down and said at a club like Dundee, it has to be projects. And I always felt if he had someone more senior by his side to simply say, look, for every project you sign, make sure you get someone else that's experienced. Have a plan B. I felt like if he had that by his side, he could have been a success at Dundee. And that was meant to happen. We approached Jim Jeffries for a technical director sort of role to advise Neil McCann, and he rejected it. And he later on said he regretted rejecting it because if he had known McCann's job was on the line, he would have accepted the role. The problem being, McCann was sacked pretty much as soon as Jeffries rejected this. So without knowing it, McCann's job sort of hindered on this. And of course, the following year, Gordon Strachan returns to Dundee, doesn't he? So I always wondered, had McCann had someone like Strachan to lean on, like his successors did? I mean, you never know. That's the way I've always felt. So the last note I'll have for you, Kilmarnock fans, you've had the good, you've had the bad, and now you'll have the pleasantry, because as it turns out, as assistant manager and manager, Neil McCann has actually never lost a derby match. To circle back to that record against Celtic as assistant manager at Rangers, I've got them all here. Whilst at Dunfermline, they were unbeaten against Wraith Rovers in 4 games, winning 3 of them and drawing the other away from home. And Dunfermline were relegated that season as well, by the way. That was in 2012-13. At Dundee, 2 Dundee derbies in 2017 in the League Cup. Drew 1 at Dens. Then the prize for that draw was to play them at Dens again a couple of weeks later, and we beat them 2-1, and it really should have been like 5. That was ridiculous. I remember it so well. Inverness, mentioned, they beat Ross County as underdogs in the Scottish Cup, and then the 2 games against Celtic with Rangers, albeit he was the assistant manager, but listen, he obviously played his part. That's 9 derbies, 6 wins, and 3 draws. So on the bright side, Kilmarnock, he's on a long-term contract. But if you find yourselves back in the Championship, at least you'll be putting Ayr United back in their place, given on these notes. So, all in all, I would actually say it's an interesting appointment. It very much varies on how they do business in January, because if they get the Neil McCann of the first Dundee season, that will be a very good appointment in my eyes. And again, he's got this reputation of kind of coming into a club that's struggling and helping them out. On the other hand, if he's bringing in this, if he's not really learnt his lessons and he wants to bring in more project signings in the middle of a relegation battle, it's not going to work out very well for them. But I suspect he's probably a bit wiser now. He did say after the Inverness gig that he wanted to get a degree in psychology before returning to management. So whether he lived through that or not, I don't know. You'd like to think he's came into this and Kilmarnock are giving their trust into him because they have seen a form of maturity with Neil McCann. So, yeah, there you go. Have my words moved you at all, Josh?
Yeah, they have, Ethan. So I thought, as a fan of Kilmarnock, I wouldn't have been inspired by the appointment. I would have been looking for, as you said, that Nielsen or Levin or someone to. Mm-hmm. That's an appointment I would have got behind if I was a Kilmarnock fan. Having said that, if you look at that, he might have interviewed very well. He might have been exactly what the board were looking for moving forward. He might have pitched, less brand of football that they could get behind. They might have pitched, this is what I want to do. This is, where I can see us going. And he might have been the best of the bunch. So you only time will tell. You can't write him off. He obviously he's got experience. He's been able to get teams out of holes before. So the only thing is it's a massive job, because that gap with the form that probably the match we'll go into next, the form that Dundee are on at the moment, they are making that gap wider every week.
Yeah, as it stands, Dundee are now 13 points above Livingston at the bottom and 9 points clear of Kilmarnock in second bottom. You're right, it's a massive job for Neil McCann and Billy Dodds as his assistant. They've got some quality to work with as well. I know Scott Tiffany's not really been playing because he's been injured. If they can get some bodies back from the injury table as well, recruit positively, they could make it work. It's not irredeemable, but it is going to be a big task. Completely agree. As you say, Dundee, we're on to something good right now. We're on to something good, and I love it. I'm loving it, and I wish I had the chance to kind of say something as I say before Christmas. Yeah, we'll just start off with the fact that Dundee they've won 3 games in a row, a first since 2014. And if we win on Sunday, not to get ahead of myself, against Hearts, that would be the first time we've won 4 since 1999 under Jockey Scott when we finished 5th in the league. So it feels like with Stephen Pressley, there's been a bit of a turnaround with the sort of vast sort of I wouldn't say majority, but the vast sort of hemisphere of the Dundee fans. There was plenty that weren't up for the appointment. There was plenty that were writing him off for the longest time, but now I think they're beginning to warm up to him now that they're kind of seeing the team sort of bear fruits of his work. It now appears that he just simply knows his best lineup, which is a big deal. When we played Falkirk, that was the start of the run. We changed the midfield, so now it's the midfield dynamic where Jan Danda can play in the 10, Callum Jones as the 8, and Ethan Hamilton drops deeper into the 6, and that seems to be, that's been colossal for Dundee's vein of form. Hamilton, traditionally a bit more of an 8 himself, he seems to kind of fluctuate with Callum Jones. They work very well together, and of course Jan Danda, we're getting the Jan Danda that we've seen at Ross County as opposed to the one at Hearts, which is huge for Dundee because we've not created many chances over the course of the season. Yet when we came to playing Kilmarnock, it was stupid. It was ridiculous. We dominated that game. We created so many. We could have been 4 up at half time. Billy Kimetcho and Callum Jones could have had a brace apiece. And then come the Dundee derby, it felt the exact same. We should have been 3-0 up come half time. So now we're seeing a team with a lot more dynamic to it. And I put a lot of that down to the change in midfield. I said earlier in the season that you should persevere with Luke Graham at the back with Billy Kimetcho, albeit that they're both quite young and inexperienced. That will give them a bit more time to gel, and they seem to have matured together exceptionally well. That game at Tannadice, they were both tremendous. And again, another reason why I wish I had a podcast before Christmas, or at least before the derby. Simon Murray got sent off against Falkirk, ruling him out for the following 2 games. And I actually said to my mate, I said, that might be a blessing in disguise because he looked very sluggish. He looked like he was breathing out of his arse quite quickly into that game. So it might actually suit us to have Ashe that's a lot more of a grafter up front. That is actually quite a decent outlet that wins a lot of headers in the air. The problem was previously when he was winning those headers, he was putting them into pockets of space with no support. So he was winning the ball just to then lose it again immediately. Then we come to Tannadice. Obviously, he gets his first goal against Kilmarnock. Massive confidence boost. And we head to Tannadice. He ran Bert Esselink ragged. I think the stats came out. Bert Esselink's like 6'4", by the way. Ashe's like 5'10", 5'11", and the stats were like 8 out of 11 duels he'd beaten Esselink to. And of course, for the goal, you see it. Kamara makes a mess of his header back towards goal. And Ashe, he's well behind Esselink. People are kind of putting it down to Esselink being quite slow, but the truth is Ashe is the fastest player in this Dundee team. And that's the one thing he's had going from the start of the season is he's got a very good burst of pace and he's very athletic. So he just shoots right beyond and he's got the composure to finish because normally he's a bit more of an instinctive finisher. We've not really seen him in that position where he's got time to think about it, but he converts it ever so well. That's actually quite a tough chance to finish. That makes sense. A tough chance to finish. I don't think I said that right the first time. And obviously, we were absolutely loving this. To a man, that was a very good Dundee display, but Ashe for me, man of the match. That excellent. He should have had more than the 1 goal as well for me. He deserves his plaudits, deserves his flowers, not just for the goal, but like I say, the overall performance. And there's so much praise you can dart across. But we'll go for your thoughts, Josh. I think you'll be a fan of hearing praise for both 2 former Falkirk men there in the eyes of Luke Graham and even Stephen Pressley.
Delighted for Luke Graham, but we'll start there with Graham and Kimetcho. Certainly in the Falkirk, Kimetcho was my man of the match. I thought he was excellent, not just with his defensive abilities, but his ability to drive forward the ball at his feet and advance the ball into the midfield. sometimes playing balls into the wide men. So that you've now got yourself a centre half pairing that you can rely upon. Um, Good they've been defensive partnerships, growing confidence. They start to, once they get some more game time together, you get a sense of where players are going to be, you know their positioning. So they're getting that game time now together. They're growing as a partnership, and I'm sure that they'll only get better. Um, you mentioned the midfield with Hamilton and Jones. The thing about having them playing together is they've got legs. They can run all game, and that was certainly a huge difference maker in the derby. Just being able to close down United's midfield and winning that midfield battle. And again, Hamilton and Jones, they're not flashy players. They never have been flashy players. They do the basics right, and I think in a side like Dundee who were struggling, that's the basis of what you need your midfield to be. Dan does your creative spark, and then you can almost let him away with not covering his man because you've got essentially three lungs in there, three sets of lungs in there with Hamilton and Jones because they can just run all day. I think your wide men are improved, especially Tony Yagan. I think he's certainly coming into a rich vein of form. He's got so much pace. And I like the way that he can take it inside on his, preferred right foot, but he's not shy in taking it to the byline to cut it back with his left. So I've been very impressed with Yogan. I see him growing in confidence. He was in and out the side start of the season. I think so to see him now get some game time and his performance is improving. He's providing a threat. And you mentioned Ash Hay, really quick, and his timing's amazing.
Yeah.
His first touch, he knows he's got the pace that he can take a heavier touch, invite defenders in, and then get there and take it past them. And that's a skill in itself to have that awareness of, how far can I defend a position that opens up spaces for the likes of Danda, Ugan to either drop deep or knock it behind and opens up the space, allow the team to move forward. And I've been impressed with him. And it actually looked as if he'd watching the goal back, it looked like it was going to go wide, and then it just nestles into the corner. It shows the precision that he had on his finish. So excellent finish. And yeah, interesting one for Dundee United, who had such a great season last year, and obviously started the season fairly well. They seem to be they got, other than that one against Celtic, they seem to be in a bit of a downward spiral at the moment.
Yeah, they were actually 5 games unbeaten going into the derby, but they kind of felt they were wildly inconsistent. And there's a feeling with them that things are kind of beginning to fall apart, which is kind of fitting because I actually said on the radio on the Saturday morning, I said, it's always yin and yang with the two Dundee teams. They never do well at the same time. One has to suffer and one has to bask in the glory. And just as we're coming on to something good, things are finally picking up and gelling. It's like they're kind of going the other way. They already had to ship off the Ukrainian goalkeeper they signed in the summer, and they're in the market for a goalkeeper this month. I believe Alnwick, the former St Mirren and Rangers goalie, is reported to be the primary target, but now Huddersfield Town are in the race. You kind of expect them to kind of, offer a higher level of wages, bring him through, and it kind of screams Xander Clark's name all over it, to be honest. But yeah, the point being, United seem to be a bit on a little bit of a shookly peg here, and now with Jim Goodwin, historically too, it seems to be when things begin to go wrong, and he's really put to the test, they kind of tend to kind of stay in a bit of a slump. Obviously, that happened when they got relegated. He had them onto something good. There was an international break that cut the momentum. They couldn't get that groove back again. They found themselves going down. In the Championship, it was very turbulent. I think they were quite fortunate that Wraith Rovers just simply didn't have the bottle to go all the way through. And then even like coming up, there's always kind of been shouts against Goodwin from some sections of the United fans, and you can take it with a pinch of salt because I think every supporter base has it. There's a part of the fans that would rather be right, correct, to the detriment of the football club rather than obviously want to be proved wrong. I think you saw that with a lot of Rangers fans, Russell Martin, and hell, even some Dundee fans with Stephen Presley. And that obviously will still exist through Goodwin and Dundee United. But yeah, they've really got to sort of pick themselves up here. The next game, it's away to Celtic, where they've not had a victory since like 1992. So even with O'Neill coming back as well, it's not ideal conditions for them. So they're really going to have to weather the storm and kind of find some stability again. I mean, Jim Goodwin too. you kind of touched on it earlier, how that went down at Aberdeen, a club with expectations. If United find themselves kind of going backwards and regressing, they might have to be a bit cutthroat and end up pulling the trigger. I'm not saying they're there yet, but it's bound to be in the back of Goodwin's head. I would think. So yeah, it's two clubs in contrast. We're very close to them as well. We're actually 3 points off both United and Aberdeen. It just goes to show how quickly things can change in football. A lot of people kind of nailing Dundee to go down. I've said from the start of the season I always felt would be all right. Didn't say it necessarily be easy. I didn't think we'd be as comfortable as being 13 points above bottom so soon. But I did think we had enough in us to kind of, you know, have a measured, more controlled season as people would have predicted. Of course, now we look at ourselves and we kind of think with a good January window, we can maybe begin to climb up the table a little bit as well. So like you see, the kind of building blocks of this Dundee side, it's beginning to be a lot more clearer. As you touched on Yogan and Congreve, both are very innovative as well. That you put them in a corner, they'll fight their way out. They'll find a different avenue out. Tony Yogan's like selling boys left and right. It just looks like he's moving back and forward, but again, they can't read him. They can't get a gauge on him. It's their one-on-one ability each is their most exceptional trait. And interestingly, I listened to Gordon Strachan on the Open Goal podcast, and he kind of pointed out that the team were kind of being built around those two wingers specifically, which makes me feel a bit nervous in the sense that they're not our players; they're on loan for a start. We have guarantee that they'll play for the full season, that they won't be recalled. So there is that, but at the same time, it just takes an injury or suspension, then suddenly it's like, oh, hang on a second, we built the team around two players, one of them's not available. Now we're a one-man band, surely not. So a strong January window where we can add a bit more depth will be, I think, critical. Ethan Hampton, by the way, he's been Dundee's most consistent player this season. If we were to stop and do Player of the Year awards right now, him and Dre Wright would probably be the running, and Luke Graham. They're the three that would be in the running to win the whole thing. And it was such a surprise to see Hamilton kind of drop in because he'd been so good in the 8. He was so effective in both boxes, driving Dundee forward. And there's been a feeling for a while that he's going to burst the net from 40 yards at one point because he's got a reputation for that. Down south, and he's had a few pops here. Nothing's pulled off yet, so you just think, when's it going to come? But yeah, no, we're in a good place. We're gelling very well, and it's very pleasing to see. And they've stepped up when it really mattered. And that victory at Tannadice, that's brought a lot of well-needed sort of credit in the bank, I think. Very tough game coming up on Sunday, but like I say, we've got to take this kind of one game at a time. Look to strengthen the squad, but very much. I think surprising a lot of people, and the players. By the way, the players seem to absolutely adore the environment that's going on there. Not just with the head coach, but with each other. There's very much a togetherness with Dundee right now, and I've seen it firsthand. So very very happy, and of course, when you win the derby as well, it's the best feeling of all time, isn't it? Just to stick one up over them. They had the audacity to claim that when we beat them at Tannadice, they put up a post about how it was a rare derby victory. Well, now we've won 3 of the last 4 in the last 12 months as well, may I add. So, get up, yes. So, but I think we've kind of covered all the main points that we wanted to cover, I think, across the Premiership. Are we missing anything, Josh?
Other than Motherwell continue to be, really consistent and finding, new ways to surprise the media and fans of Scottish football with, their brand of football so progressive that, the people are starting to say, is it a 4-horse race? I think they're just a little bit too far away just now to really challenge for the title. But I do think they'll be heavily involved in who wins the title. I think their matches against Hearts, Celtic and Rangers will be, decisive in who wins the title. So, and then on the other end of the spectrum, Livingston, who, again, haven't won since the second weekend of the season against Falkirk, a team that Livingston just always seem to have Falkirk's number at the moment. They're in really turbulent times. Obviously, that statement came out about Martindale getting backed by Calvin Ford. They have just today signed Alex Tam, the Estonian striker, on loan to the end of the season. So more options for Martindale to look at. They've been linked with Scott Arfield as well. I don't know how much there is to that. I don't know how much he would impact them. He was struggling for game time with us. I think he'd struggle for game time there as well. But I've seen that rumoured. So yeah, I just don't see a way out of it for Livingston.
Yeah, it kind of feels like they're kind of doomed for the bottom spot, it would feel. And Kilmarnock, obviously, they want to climb up the table a little bit. And I think St Mirren are still kind of down there as well. It always happens when a team wins the League Cup. They tend to kind of struggle actually in the league. But you'd expect them to kind of pick themselves up sooner or later. So it kind of maybe more of a question of who's on the downfall. Because if there's teams like Dundee that are kind of on the ascendancy, assuming that continues, or you can look at St Mirren, who you expect to get back on the ascendancy. If United and maybe Aberdeen, are they maybe a bit of a decline? Obviously, for Aberdeen, it always depends on who they can bring in to make a sort of positive change. But you're right to touch on Motherwell. I almost kind of forgot about them. They've been excellent this season. I think they've been everyone's favourite team to watch in the league, to be honest. They absolutely play the best brand of football. And yeah, it's a manager that's going to be very well in demand. I think they're going to see this through until the summer at the very least. I can't see him leaving for a job like Aberdeen either. Yeah, very, very impressed with Motherwell. Hearts, though, we can maybe finish this with a bit of title talk because, truth be told, Celtic are going to throw a lot of money in this January window. Rangers are likely going to throw a lot of money at this January window, but so will Hearts, because in the Hearts field they'll be sitting there thinking we might never get this chance again. This might be as positive as it gets in terms of getting to January window and having a 6-point gap at the top. What's heartbreaking for them is they've won all 4 games against Celtic and Rangers this season. That's only half the Old Firm games they're required to play in the league, and it's still only a 6-point gap. The consistency that they're going to have to keep up is going to be ridiculous. And of course, the heavy defeat. I say heavy defeat in terms of the performance against Hibs. They got beat 3-2, but listen, Hibs could have been 4-5 up. They were getting destroyed at one point. That was a bit of a haymaker. And they got the win against Livingston, which is the crucial thing, because it seemed to be a bit of a nervy second half. Now they come to Dens, where they famously lost winning the league in 1986. Some fans will remember. And they've got to simply turn up a gear. They've got to show up. They can't afford to be lackluster of any sort. They've got to try and hit Dundee hard, really, because in this case, this is the part of the season where the pressure begins to pick up. The other teams around them are going to get a bit better, or we're expecting them to get a bit better. I don't know if you can maybe set us off with a prediction, because at one point I was beginning to say I can believe that they can win the league, but now the game changes so quickly. I'm expecting Celtic and Rangers to improve immensely, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to stay with my initial predictions across the season that I don't think they'll win the league. At the same time, though, I'm probably still going to back Celtic, but it's all about this January window, because I think Danny Röhl, as we say earlier in the podcast, doing a very good job with what he's got at his disposal.
Yeah, but my prediction is that Hearts finish second. I think they split the Old Firm. I think you saw it at the weekend. They created so many chances in the first half, only got the one goal. Second half, Livingston were knocking on the door, probably should have equalised in the last few minutes, and Hearts, very nervously and scrappily hung on. You saw it against Kilmarnock in the one each draw. That late goal, I think it was Bruce Anderson, equalised. I think Hearts might run into trouble with just a lack of conversion in key moments. And as the season goes on, as they continue to get chased, the pressure ramps up, and it's just whether or not the squad can handle it. I would love Hearts to win the league, and I think they have the capability. But now that if Nancy had stayed, I'd have backed Hearts to win the league. But with Martin O'Neill in charge, I can see Celtic finding form and just about nicking it. But I think it will go down to the last few games.
I can't disagree with anything that you've said there, Josh. I'd like to thank you for obviously joining me for the podcast. Unless there's anything more to talk, I think we've kind of covered everything now, surely. And obviously a big thanks to Stu for coming on earlier to give us a bit of more in-depth sight for the Old Firm derby. So we leave you here just to thank you, the audience, for listening to this episode of the Salmon's Pizzeria. And obviously for my part, just a reminder here that Dundee is dark.